Some days, the smallest thing is enough to shatter your mental peace. A careless comment or a strange look hits you, and suddenly your mind spirals out of control. You hold back at first, but it lingers, repeating, growing louder, quietly hijacking your inner calm. I remember a time when one simple sentence haunted my thoughts the entire day. It was not harsh or deeply offensive, yet it stayed with me long after the speaker had moved on and forgotten. I replayed it, analyzed it, imagined the perfect comeback. Without realizing it, I surrendered my emotional control to that fleeting moment. Then I confronted a hard, stoic truth. The world was not the thing disturbing my peace. My own judgment of the event created the internal chaos. If that holds true, it means I have far more power than I originally thought. So let us look at this together. Are people actually stealing your peace away? Or are you handing it over without realizing it? Most people stumble through life believing the external world dictates how they feel inside. They say things like, "He made me angry," "She ruined my day," or "They pushed me too far." For a long time, I bought into that illusion. It felt completely natural to blame external events for my internal suffering. But as I studied my own reactions, I began to seriously question that flawed mindset. Think about it. If the world truly controlled our feelings, everyone would react identically to the same situation. Yet that is clearly false. One person faces an insult and instantly boils with rage. Another hears those exact words and simply walks away, completely untouched. The event is identical, but the personal experience shifts completely. That difference reveals a crucial lesson. The event itself never disturbs us. Our interpretation of it does. I remember a specific moment in my Stoic practice that made this painfully clear. Someone offered criticism that felt deeply personal, though not overtly aggressive. But it was sharp enough to trigger my ego. I carried that heavy feeling for hours, endlessly replaying the moment, desperately trying to justify my own anger. Initially, I told myself I was mad because they were simply wrong and disrespectful. But as I sat with the discomfort, I realized their words were not the actual problem. The pain came entirely from my interpretation. A piece of me felt judged, naked, and exposed. Instead of observing that truth clearly, I chose a blind reaction. And in reacting, I lost myself. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote a truth I only grasped much later. He noted that true power lies over the mind, never over outside events. When I first studied that quote, it sounded simple, even obvious. But actually living that philosophy is brutal. It forces you to take uncomfortable responsibility for your mind. This is where you and I have to be brutally honest. You cannot say someone made you mad. You must admit you actively helped create that feeling. People naturally resist this truth because blaming the outside world feels so much easier. It protects our fragile ego. Playing the victim lets you feel self-righteous, but it keeps you in a cage, because if others dictate your emotions, you will spend your entire life at their mercy. Your mental peace will constantly depend on how others behave, speak, and treat you daily. That is a weak, fragile way to exist. But apply a different lens, and everything shifts. Stop seeing your mind as a passive sponge and recognize it as an active interpreter. Every single event passes through the filter of your judgment before becoming anger, deep frustration, or hurt. There is always a tiny fraction of a moment. A gap where you decide what the event means. We usually do this unconsciously, making it feel totally automatic. But make no mistake, it remains a choice. Face disrespect and you can view it as an attack on your worth, or simply a reflection of their own broken state. When life derails your plans, You can view it as terribly unfair and incredibly frustrating. Or you can accept it as just another part of the natural Stoic flow. The facts stay the same, but your lived experience transforms entirely. That is your true power. I found that the more I trained this mental awareness, the less reactive I became. Not because the world suddenly improved, but because I stopped assigning their actions so much meaning. I quit assuming the universe revolved around me. I stopped taking every minor daily inconvenience personally. And gradually, a profound shift occurred. The exact situations that once broke me lost their sting. Not perfectly, but enough for total clarity. Look, this does not mean you will never feel anger again. It does not mean you become a numb robot. It just means you and I finally start mastering the hidden process behind our emotions. You start catching the exact split second where a judgment shifts into an emotion. Spot that moment, and you can step in. You can make a different choice. That is where real freedom begins. It is a simple truth, but hard to swallow. Events do not upset you. The story you tell yourself about those events is what breaks your peace. Once you and I truly grasp this, living it, not just reading about it, we stop being victims to the world. We take total ownership of our inner lives. That duty might feel crushing at first, but it is your ultimate source of power. Most daily suffering does not spring from the actual event. It comes from how incredibly fast we react to it. That blind speed is the root of most regret. It is a toxic loop that plays out on repeat. An event hits. Someone runs their mouth. A crisis drops. Almost instantly, the mind leaps to strike back. Zero breathing room, zero thought, just raw reflex. And 9 times out of 10, that reflex is fueled by blind emotion, not clear logic. I used to think snapping back fast made me tough. I thought a lightning-quick comeback proved I was confident. But practicing Stoicism taught me the opposite. The faster I fired back, the less power I held. One specific day proved this outright. A guy openly challenged my hard work right in front of my peers. He did not yell, but his tone was total disrespect. I felt the heat instantly spike in my blood. Chest tight, mind racing. I geared up to snap back, to guard my ego, to verbally tear him down and take charge. But my practice kicked in. Just a 2-second delay, but it broke the habit loop. In that tiny sliver of quiet, a hard truth hit me. That burning need to fight back was not strength. It was pure, raw insecurity. I just wanted to guard my pride, not uncover facts. That tiny hesitation flipped the script. Instead of lashing out, I forced myself to watch and wait. Doing that instantly drained the heat right out of my anger. It did not vanish, but the fog cleared. I had enough mental space to deliberately respond, not blindly react. Here is the trap you and I usually hit. The gap between reacting and responding is not about the words. It is the mindset you drag into the fight. And that mental posture depends entirely on building a buffer before you strike. The Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius constantly warned himself against trusting first impressions. He knew firsthand that the initial thought crashing into your brain is rarely objective reality. It is just a pitch, a loud guess begging for your focus. You absolutely do not have to buy into it right away. When someone talks down to you, the gut instinct screams that you are under assault and must swing back hard. Hold the line for just a second, and a new angle emerges. You realize their toxic attitude is entirely their own baggage. Or maybe the crisis is completely overblown. The fatal flaw is never taking that breath. People crash straight from the trigger into the fight, pure animal reflex. The speed makes the outburst feel inevitable. It is a lie. That buffer zone always exists, no matter how tiny. That exact margin is where your true leverage lives. It is no massive cinematic event. It feels entirely ordinary. Silent and totally unseen. But it sits right there, begging you to grab it. I trained this muscle on low stakes at first, not during total disasters, just standard daily friction. When a coworker cut me off, when a schedule blew up, whenever that classic wave of annoyance spiked, I refused to take the bait. I held my breath, clamped my jaw, and mentally confirmed I could just wait them out. Honestly, those first few attempts felt incredibly rigid, like I was bottling up an explosion. But the reps paid off. The delay turned into instinct, and the anger faded out. I learned that emotional spikes are just ocean waves. They swell up fast, but they break and roll away. Starve them of oxygen, and they lose their bite. In that vacuum, logic takes over. You view the whole conflict through a completely rational lens. You lock onto the actual stakes and ruthlessly drop whatever is just petty noise. Listen, you and I are not bearing our feelings or acting like robots. We are just building a fortress against being manipulated by them. Mastering this mental delay takes serious grit. It is a grueling daily practice you forge hour by hour, trench by trench. But every minor victory lays another brick. With every held breath, you cement your ironclad grip over total chaos. You learn to trust that instant reactions prove absolutely nothing. You start realizing that true Stoic strength is entirely quiet. It never rushes, it never begs for attention. It just stays completely steady. Ultimately, that pause is more than just a technique. It fundamentally changes how you relate to your own chaotic mind. Instead of getting dragged around by fleeting emotions, you simply observe them. You question them, and then carefully choose your response. Inside that choice, you uncover what most people spend their lives chasing: a genuine sense of self-mastery. A self-mastery that does not need the outside world to change, but requires you to stay grounded. Look, you and I share a simple but brutal misunderstanding that causes almost all our social pain. We falsely assume that whatever others say and do is about us. We treat their words as verdicts on our worth. We see their actions as a mirror of our identity. By doing that, we put ourselves at the center of the universe. Honestly, for years, I made that exact mistake. If someone snapped at me, I was sure I messed up. If they brushed off my opinion, I instantly felt small. And if a person acted cold, I immediately questioned my own value. But through my philosophy practice, I realized something that completely flipped my perspective. People do not act based on who you are. They act based entirely on who they are. Their actions are driven by their own messy thoughts, hidden fears, past trauma, and current mood. 9 times out of 10, it has absolutely nothing to do with you. When someone acts impatient, they are just projecting their own heavy pressure. When they criticize, it exposes their own deep dissatisfaction. And when they act rude, it is usually a flare-up of their inner turmoil, not a calculated strike against you. I still remember the exact moment this clicked for me. I was talking to someone who snapped at me for no reason. My immediate instinct was to take it personally, to assume they were outright disrespecting me. I felt that familiar hot wave of anger rising up. But instead of lashing out, I paused. I looked closer, not at the specific words they used, but at how they delivered them. Their strained tone, their tight shoulders, their distracted eyes. It hit me that something else was eating at them, completely unrelated to me. Right then, I realized I held the power of choice. I could take their behavior as a personal threat and get defensive, or recognize it as their own internal chaos and simply hold my peace. Marcus Aurelius often wrote that people act poorly because they are blind to what is good, not because they are actively plotting to destroy you. This philosophical mindset does not excuse their toxic behavior, but it completely rewires your response. Rather than taking offense, you create a buffer of stoic distance, maybe even pity. It feels just like running into a stranger who is hopelessly lost. You never take their frantic actions personally. You just see clearly that they are operating from a heavily limited mindset. Here is where you and I struggle. Our brains rush to invent meaning, especially when things get uncomfortable. We filter every tone, word, and action through our insecurities. Unconsciously, we craft a dramatic narrative that drops us right into the dead center of the conflict. A friend ignores you and you feel rejected. A coworker disagrees with you and you feel entirely attacked. A partner grows quiet and you assume you are worthless. But these frantic thoughts are not facts. They are mere assumptions. And almost always, they are dead wrong. I started actively testing this theory in my daily life. Every time my ego wanted to take an insult personally, I forced myself to ask, what if this has absolutely nothing to do with me? At first, it felt weird, like I was totally invalidating my own lived experience. But as I kept practicing it, I saw just how brutally accurate it really was. Heavy personal attacks lost their sting, not because the world got nicer, but because I stopped making everything a mirror of my flaws. Now, this does not mean you block out constructive feedback or fake a numb exterior. There are times when people are actually addressing your actions, when their words carry harsh truth or clear intent, but even then, you hold the reins. You can extract the useful lessons and discard the garbage without tying your ego to the event. You are never defined by the random opinions passing by. You never have to react to every face made in your direction. A deep, unshakable freedom emerges when you stop making the universe about yourself. You navigate life with far less tension, zero defensiveness, and razor-sharp clarity. You finally see humans as they really are, instead of staring at shadows of your own deep insecurities. Their explosive anger fails to drag you into the mud. Their sharp criticism bounces right off, and their toxic habits lose all power over your steady, grounded mind. Ultimately, you and I must realize that people always reveal themselves, not us. It is not just a comforting thought. It is the ultimate shield for our inner peace. This practice lets us step back from useless conflict and stay rooted in our own rational mind. Once you grasp this principle, you stop reacting to every chaotic shift around you. Instead, you become grounded. You observe without getting dragged in, responding only when reason demands it, and staying entirely untouched when it does not. Anger feels intoxicating in the moment. It hands you a false sense of certainty, an illusion that you are perfectly right and must take immediate action. But when you examine it philosophically, you realize it is not true power at all. It is dead weight. It is a burden you hold around long after the event ends, long after the person who provoked your reaction has completely moved on. The longer you grip it, the heavier that emotional baggage gets. Early in my Stoic journey, I thought holding on to fury meant defending my boundaries and refusing to yield. In reality, I was just clinging to a poison that was quietly draining my energy. Years ago, someone made a comment that stuck with me far longer than reason dictated. It was not some massive battle, just a fleeting moment of petty disrespect. Yet I looped it endlessly in my head. I visualized the perfect comeback, analyzing exactly how I should have handled their words. Every time I revisited that memory, the resentment flared up stronger, not weaker. The absurd part was that the actual event was completely finished. It lived strictly in my mind, yet it dictated my mood as if the insult was actively occurring right then. That was the breakthrough where I realized anger requires no current reality to survive. It only needs the spotlight of your daily attention. The Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote that the ultimate revenge is simply not becoming like the person who wronged you. When I first studied that text, I assumed it was about moral high ground, but after years of practice, I saw the deeper psychological truth. It means refusing to let external actions corrupt your inner peace. By gripping that anger, you are absolutely not punishing your enemy. You are actively letting their poor behavior control your mind, even when they are gone. You artificially stretch the trauma way past its natural lifespan. Unchecked emotion has a tricky way of convincing your ego that it is totally justified. And occasionally, it is. People will act unjustly. They will speak out of turn and behave in ways that are deeply reckless or toxic. A biological reaction is natural, but the real philosophical challenge is not that initial spark. The real issue is how you manage it afterward. Let us look at this together. If you choose to obsess over it, feeding it daily in your thoughts, it transforms into a heavy burden you actively choose to carry. In my own life, I noticed how often I volunteered for that misery, not intentionally, but through sheer unexamined habit. By constantly dwelling on the past offense, every single trip down memory lane meant I was hoisting that rock back up, making it heavier every time. It felt just like dragging a massive stone from place to place. Except there was no logical destination, no real purpose, just the exhausting act of carrying. And the longer I gripped it, the more it poisoned everything else. My daily mood, my deep focus, my mindfulness. Honestly, letting it drop did not feel natural at first. It felt like surrendering my self-respect, almost as if I was letting the antagonist entirely off the hook for their bad behavior. But philosophy teaches us that is an illusion. Harboring rage never fixes the past. It never rewrites history. It only ruins your present mental state. Once I shifted my perspective here, dropping the grudge felt less like a defeat and much more like total liberation. Through mindfulness, you will eventually catch that exact second where you realize you are clutching something totally useless. It is rarely loud. It is a quiet, subtle shift in awareness, but it is undeniably there. In that exact fraction of time, you face a choice. You can haul it further or simply put it down. True detachment is not about erasing history or faking toxic positivity. It is actively ruling that your current sanity matters far more than a ghost. I began applying this Stoic rule to minor annoyances. Catching my brain looping an old argument, I would force a pause and ask, is this serving me? Is it worth my life force? Almost always the answer was a hard no. That logical wedge gave me the exact distance required to starve the emotion entirely. And gradually, that intense fire would die. Rarely instantly, and almost never completely, but absolutely enough to hand me back the reins. Ultimately, rage lacks the legs to stand by itself. It demands your active participation, your focus, and your stubborn willingness to drag it forward. And when you and I finally see this truth, we realize we hold far more power than we assumed. You will never control the external chaos, but you absolutely dictate how long you suffer from it. That single choice dictates whether an injury dies on impact or haunts you for decades. On the surface, anger always looks like a very straightforward emotion. It hits hard, fast, and feels earned. but interrogate it like a true philosopher, and the truth shifts. It is rarely the core issue, just a convenient mask hiding a much deeper, uglier vulnerability you are desperately trying to avoid. Let us examine this together. For years, I blamed my anger on the chaotic world outside me. Someone crossed a boundary, an outcome felt unfair, or a situation just did not go my way. But as I trained my mind to pay closer attention, a clear pattern finally emerged. Anger was never the root cause. It was just a thick armor protecting something underneath. Picture a time when a friend bailed on me last minute. My instant, unexamined reaction was pure irritation. I told myself they lacked respect, that my time was cheap to them. I dragged that heavy frustration around. But when I applied strict Stoic discipline and looked honestly, stripping away the excuses, the truth shifted. The sudden cancellation did not enrage me. I was simply hurt. I felt entirely unimportant. I really wanted that connection. Losing it struck a nerve far deeper than mere surface rage. Facing that reality stung. I had to confess, my reaction was a lot messier than simple anger. It was rarely about external events. It was about my own fragile ego in that second. Anger was a much easier shield to carry. It felt powerful. But the raw truth beneath it was complete vulnerability. Confronting that weakness demanded total inner honesty, no blaming the world, just facing my own mind. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to view reality exactly as it is, entirely stripped of wishful thinking or emotional static. That fundamental truth governs not just the external universe, but your own internal landscape. Refuse to dissect your own emotional state, and you remain a prisoner to impulses you cannot even comprehend. But practice objective self-observation. Drop the defensive excuses. Watch how fast your mental clarity begins to shift. The blinding intensity loses its grip. Most walk through life entirely reactive. They feel rage and stop. They lash out. They defend the outburst. Then they repeat the cycle without questioning. And because of that mental laziness, history repeats itself. The exact same triggers spark fury. Zero personal growth happens. But when you finally look under the hood, you realize those sharp reactions stem from unexamined beliefs and outdated emotional habits. I started asking myself razor-sharp questions during moments of intense friction. Not to overcomplicate the psychology, but to cut through the noise and find immediate clarity. What is actually driving this right now? What hides under this defense? The answers often shocked me. Often it was deep insecurity, bitter disappointment, or a quiet fear of being completely overlooked. Once I labeled the core truth, the anger evaporated. Naming your exact emotion is a profound superpower. When you pivot from screaming that you are mad to admitting you feel dismissed or uncertain, you upgrade from blind reaction to high-level awareness. That mental space is freedom. It lets you handle reality with stoic precision instead of raw impulse. Instead of exploding, you articulate your boundaries clearly. Sometimes, true wisdom means staying completely silent. You do not need to overanalyze every minor fluctuation in your daily mood. But if a trigger knocks you off balance, it is your duty to investigate the root cause. Do not attack yourself. Do not judge the spark. Just observe the naked truth. Absolute clarity empowers real transformation. With daily practice, decoding these inner mechanisms becomes second nature to you. You map the bridge between unchecked thoughts and outward behavior. You regain your sovereignty. The world will still test you. People will still act out of line. But your stance becomes unbreakable. The external chaos is identical. What changed is your mastery over your own internal domain. Searching your soul is not about achieving perfection. It is about waking up from the illusion. Once you strip away the lies, unseen emotional currents can no longer drag you under. You anchor yourself in this world. A quiet fortitude grows, not from dictating reality, but from absolute mastery over the space between your ears. You and I might think inner peace means being a doormat, tolerating disrespect just to avoid friction. That is not stoicism. That is cowardice. For years, I confused patience with cowardly silence. I thought dodging conflict made me somehow bulletproof. So I let the same boundaries crumble. Tiny things, initially. Someone talking over me. Condescending remarks. People wasting my precious time. And I just swallowed it. I claimed it was not a big deal, but you and I both know, suppression never creates genuine tranquility. Let's examine this. It creates pressure. Over time, that friction builds up entirely inside you. You start feeling a quiet frustration, a subtle resentment that doesn't show at first, but slowly spreads. Eventually, it forces its way out. Usually during a moment that seems completely unrelated. A minor inconvenience hits, a tiny trigger, and suddenly your emotional reaction is completely out of proportion. Not because of that specific event, but because of the massive weight of everything left unsaid. In my own practice, I realized my so-called patience was just avoidance, and that avoidance eventually mutated into pure resentment. Marcus Aurelius never taught passive acceptance. He taught us to align with reason. That means actively defining exactly what you will and won't tolerate. You can't control how others act, but you are entirely responsible for what you accept. Without clear definitions, nobody knows where your boundaries are. Not because they don't care, but simply because you never actually showed them where the line is. I recall a time someone kept talking over me in meetings. Every single time I felt a flash of irritation, but I brushed it off. I convinced myself it wasn't worth a fight. After a while, though, that tiny annoyance didn't stay small. It festered. It fundamentally changed how I viewed that person. Not from a single mistake, but from constant repetition without any clear boundaries. It finally hit me. Nothing was changing because I hadn't made it absolutely clear that it had to. When I finally spoke up, I didn't yell. I hid no frustration. I just stated my terms plainly. I said I expected to finish my thoughts without interruption. I did it with total calm, no blame, zero emotional baggage attached. And things shifted. Not overnight, but enough. The disrespectful pattern finally broke. More importantly, I felt a massive weight lift. Not because they instantly transformed, but because I stopped betraying my own needs. Setting Stoic boundaries doesn't require rage. It demands clarity. You aren't trying to control anyone else. You're simply stating what you will tolerate and what you absolutely won't. No hostility needed. You and I both know people dodge boundaries to avoid conflict. They fear rejection or worry about looking too difficult. But the hard truth? Vague boundaries guarantee much more conflict down the road. They let frustration fester in silence. Look, there's a huge difference between an emotional reaction and an intentional response. Drawing a line in anger usually sparks resistance, but establishing limits from a place of stoic calm, that carries a completely different kind of power. You aren't trying to win an argument. You are simply protecting your own mental balance. You don't owe anyone a long explanation. You never have to justify your personal needs. Just stay clear and strictly consistent. I started applying this philosophy in tiny steps. Not fighting every battle at once, I just tracked what drained my energy and addressed it when needed. Sometimes, I just asked for space. Other times it meant saying no to a favor, or just choosing to walk away entirely. It felt awkward at first, but eventually that initial discomfort vanished. What took its place was an unshakable sense of self-respect. The biggest philosophical lesson here? Setting limits isn't about fixing other people. It's about fundamentally rebuilding your relationship with yourself. It means finally accepting that your time, your focus, and your energy hold real value. And guarding those resources isn't selfish at all. It's mandatory. Stop expecting people to magically guess your limits. Define them yourself, and you'll instantly wipe out a massive source of daily frustration. Ultimately, a Stoic calm doesn't mean having zero limits. It's the direct result of enforcing them. You don't have to react to every single crisis. But you also shouldn't tolerate everything. There is a strict balance here. Mastering that middle ground keeps you grounded without turning you into a doormat. You stay peaceful, but keep your forward momentum. People often mistake a tranquil mind for pure genetics. Like it's a gift some folks are just born with, while the rest suffer. But look closely, and you and I will see the truth. Emotional control isn't a personality trait. It is a daily discipline. A mindset forged over years through deliberate choices, tiny flashes of self-awareness, relentless, consistent practice. For years, I falsely believed I'd eventually reach a state where nothing could shake me, a perfect, untouchable level of control. But chasing that impossible goal just brought me more grief. The actual reality is messier. Inner peace isn't a permanent baseline. It's a practice you return to day after day. I still have moments where irritation spikes. When a project falls apart. When somebody drops a comment that gets under my skin. In those seconds, my old flaws still surface. The raw urge to snap back, to judge, to take it all personally. Look, you and I know the impulses never vanish. The difference now is I catch them sooner, and by noticing, I forge space. That fraction of a second is where everything shifts. Without awareness, we have no choice. Without choice, zero control. Marcus Aurelius never found peace by running from his problems. He stood right in the fire, flanked by heavy pressure, duty, and endless chaos. Still, he relentlessly trained his mind back to baseline, not by hiding, but by shifting his internal lens. He practiced the daily Stoic rule. Outside events are harmless. Our judgments cause the pain. And he did not just read that theory once and conquer it. He hammered it in through constant repetition. Because intellectual understanding alone will not rewire your brain. It takes rigorous reps. I finally realized this in my own philosophical practice. My deepest moments of peace were never random. They were the direct result of doing the daily work, of fiercely guarding my own thoughts. When I interrogated my own anger, when I chose to pause instead of reacting blindly, the strength compounded. Over time, those choices entirely rewired how I handled chaos that used to break me. It was no overnight miracle. The shift was brutally slow, barely visible. But the proof arrived when old triggers hit me square in the chest, and the old burning intensity simply was not there anymore. This mental training is not about violently shutting off your thoughts. It is about steering the mind, firmly and relentlessly, back to center. I built this muscle by actively pivoting my focus the second disaster struck. Instead of dwelling on the wreck, I immediately demanded, what is the next move? When frustration boiled up, I ruthlessly isolated what was actually in my control. If I caught myself spiraling over useless garbage, I snapped my attention elsewhere. Not perfect, but enough to break the destructive cycle. Here is where you and I must guard the gates of our own minds. The media you scroll, the complaints you entertain, and the rooms you sit in entirely dictate your internal weather. If you bathe in toxic outrage, chronic whining, and hair-trigger reactions, staying stoic becomes mathematically impossible. Not because your willpower is weak, but because you are hand-feeding the beast you want to starve. I quickly learned that when I violently cut the static and curated my inputs, the mental fog lifted. Less volatile, highly grounded. And remember, the real secret here is daily consistency, not extreme intensity. Most beginners try to overhaul their entire life overnight. They crave cheap, instant hacks. But human psychology rejects brute force. It surrenders to steady, unyielding repetition. Tiny, relentless habits crush those massive, rare efforts that people abandon by Tuesday. This philosophy is not about achieving one flawless day. It is about dragging yourself back to the work after you fail, after you lose your temper, after you stumble. Every single comeback hardens the muscle. Over time, an invisible shift occurs. You actually begin to trust your own grit when the sky starts falling. You realize true inner calm is never fragile. It does not shatter when adversity hits. It becomes a permanent tool on your belt, not because life got softer, but because your foundation became unbreakable. The exact same disasters still strike. People remain toxic. Plans still evaporate without a warning. But your inner response to that chaos is fundamentally altered. Listen, a tranquil mind is not some hidden treasure you stumble upon. It is a fortress you build brick by brick, choice by choice. The deeper you go into this practice, the more instinctive it feels. Not effortless, but familiar. You and I stop praying for an easy, frictionless life. Instead, we build the iron discipline to stand steady, right inside the storm. That specific pivot, above all else, generates a profound inner stillness that absolutely refuses to rely on outside conditions. It relies purely on your power to command yourself, no matter how loud the world gets.